Thank you to all of those already here for making the time today for this important event. Um, my name is Maya Autre. I'm the Director of Development, Communications, and Marketing at the International Step by Step Association, also known as ESA. I have the distinct pleasure of hosting today's session as part of ECOS, which stands for Early Childhood One System. For those of you who may not have heard of it yet or aren't as familiar with it, ECOS is a platform that brings together partners from across the early childhood field, all committed in advancing strong connected systems through shared learning, collaboration, and evidence-informed practice. Through ECOS, experts contribute knowledge covering a wide range of topics, offering personal learning opportunities for actors across the ecosystem in various formats, as well as through thought leadership discussions and bring together voices from across the field and the world. This brings us to today's event, which addresses a vital topic as far as ECOS is concerned: gender equality and prevention of violence against women and children. These are foundational concerns. They are all too often existential and with lifelong implications. Without safe, equitable environments for children and their caregivers, we cannot achieve the kind of early childhood system and outcomes we are working towards together. So we're truly glad to have with us today the looking at the publication launch for parenting programs to prevent violence and advance gender equality. We are going to explore findings from a global mapping of parenting programs aimed at preventing violence and advancing gender equality. As well, we'll hear about parenting programs as a powerful entry point, not only to support families, but to address both violence against children and violence against women in more integrated and transformative ways. We have quite a lineup today, and I'll introduce them one by one. So we have Lucia Quintero from the Oak Foundation. She brings deep experience in advancing gender equality and violence prevention through philanthropy, and will open the discussion. Jane Cato Wallace from the Prevention Collaborative, a leading voice on evidence and learning in violence prevention, who will present the key findings from the global mapping. Then we have Christine Kolb-Stewart from UNICEF, who works at the intersection of research and policy and will share recommendations and for strengthening programs. And Ha Tran, the Research and Training Center from the Research and Training Center for Community Development, who brings grounded implementation experience and will share insights from Vietnam, and Jenny Dout from Parenting for Lifelong Health, who will close the session with key reflections, drawing on extensive experience in parenting program design and scale. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Lucia. The floor is all yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Maya, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you very much to the ECOS Institute for hosting us today. I'm going to kick us off by offering a perspective from private philanthropy and excitement from private philanthropy, in particularly why investing in parenting with an intentional and gender transformative focus on engaging men in early caregiving has really been a no-brainer for us. And honestly, it's been one of the most exciting levers for change that we see today. So I think we all know that for a very long time, violence in the home, whether it be intimate partner violence or violent discipline or emotional abuse, has not been sufficiently addressed. And one of the biggest reasons is because it happens in such a private sphere, and getting to what happens behind closed doors is very hard. The norms that sustain that they're very deeply embedded in our communities, and we've often portrayed this as an individualized problem rather than a structural and preventable problem. So as a result, preventing violence in families has often carried kind of this aura of impossibility, and most of our efforts and resources have been on response rather than prevention in dealing with the harm once it happens. However, I think from a private philanthropy perspective, we see something shifting, something feels different now, and it's all coming from the parenting field. So I feel that one of the big things that we're seeing is that we're now sitting on some of the strongest evidence we've ever had that parenting support with actively involves men in caregiving and intentionally challenge harmful gender norms and power imbalances, what we often call gender transformative parenting, can significantly reduce violence inside the home for both women and children. So that's super exciting. And I think it excites me the most for three concrete reasons. The first is that we have this robust evidence that this works, that violence is preventable. And these are some of my favorite statistics out there. I am a data person, so let me just share them with you. In Rwanda, the Bandeberejo program cut sexual intimate partner violence by 50% and physical punishment of children by around 30%, with effects still sustained 6 years after the program. In another context, in Uganda, parenting for respectability also reduced both partner violence and harsh parenting by around 20%, with the strongest effects seen when fathers were actively involved in the program. So these are not small shifts at the margins. These are large, sustained reductions in violence where it's hardest to reach. Um, and that's already reason enough to be excited. But the second reason that we're excited is that, as Maya was saying, these reductions have a cascading effect because they strengthen all the other impact that the ECD field traditionally already cares about. Reducing violence creates that safe, nurturing environment where healthy development, learning milestones, emotional well being, improved mental health can actually take root and thrive. So it affects a big part of our field. And thirdly, the third reason that we're excited is that engaging fathers changes the future, not just the present. So there's this really wonderful data on longitudinal data from Australia that shows that adults who report having had stronger father-child relationships were 26% less likely to perpetrate violence later in life. In other words, this work doesn't just reduce harm now, but it helps break those cycles of violence across generations. Um, and I think this excitement is catching up to the policy level as well. Following from the Bogota conference on violence against children, governments are increasingly seeing parenting support as central to violence prevention strategies and policies. Um, but of course, we recognize that translating this momentum into impact requires a deliberate shift in approach, that it can be quite challenging. The evidence from these programs is quite clear. You need to change um, approach in the sense that you have to engage men not as risks to be managed, but intentionally as caregivers and partners in family well-being, and also challenge harmful norms around masculinity, power, and control directly. One without the other does not lead to these really remarkable changes. Uh, so I think that's why this mapping report you will hear about matters. It helps identify where there is work. This work is already happening so that we can learn about it. It identifies where there's readiness to take this approach a little bit further and that where targeted support is needed. We know this is not going to happen organically. So I think the field is quite intentional in moving away from isolated champion examples and taking this to standard practice in the field. This will require clarity, skills, resources, institutional support, and this mapping really contributes to this and gives us a journey, a pathway to start acting. So thank you very much, and over to you, Maya.
Thank you so much, Lucia. Much appreciated. Thank you for framing this discussion for us and for your work in this area. Next, I'm happy to introduce Jane Cato Wallace to share the global mapping findings.
Thanks so much, Maya. And thank you to Lucia from the Oak Foundation for grounding us on why this work is so important and the impact that we can have when we more intentionally integrate a gender transformative approach to prevent violence in the home. Next slide, please. Before we share the findings from this global mapping, we first wanted to define a couple terms you'll hear us using again and again. So, when we say the intersections of VOW and VAC, what we mean is that violence against women and violence against children are connected forms of violence that often happen in the same families and are driven by similar factors like unequal power, harmful gender norms, parental stress. For example, when there is violence between caregivers, like when a man uses violence against an intimate female partner, their children are often affected too, directly or indirectly. And many of the norms that uphold harsh punishment of children and that perpetuate the control and dominance of women are the same. For example, the belief that these types of violence are normal and should not be discussed or challenged openly. So, addressing only one type of violence without the other can really miss important risks and opportunities for prevention. And when we say gender transformative parenting programs, what we mean by that is in addition to focusing on the development and protection and well-being of children, these types of gender transformative parenting programs also actively challenge the harmful gender norms and power dynamics that contribute to violence in the home. These types of programs encourage equal and respectful relationships between caregivers. They recognize the ways in which we may unintentionally perpetuate rather, inequality between sons and daughters, or we might treat them differently. They promote nonviolent and gender equal parenting. And they're really intentional, as Lucia was saying earlier, about supporting men's active involvement in caregiving and as equal partners. So a bit of definition setting there. Next slide. So there have already been many gender transformative parenting programs that have been rigorously documented and evaluated. Programs like Bande Barejo in Rwanda, Real Fathers, Parenting for Respectability in Uganda. But this mapping wanted to cast the net a bit further, to look at the parenting field in general. How are other parenting programs currently addressing harmful gender attitudes and reducing violence? Which parenting programs have the potential to expand the evidence on how these approaches can create safer environments for families? So, this mapping was not meant to be exhaustive nor systematic, but rather provide a kind of snapshot of parenting programs globally with a focus on those in the global south. Next slide. So, how did we do this mapping? We identified programs that work directly with parents and caregivers and fit at least some of our set criteria. The whole list is in the report itself, but for example, we looked at programs that had a focus on violence against children, but maybe less so on IPV or gender. We looked at programs that worked with male caregivers. We looked at programs that were already being implemented at scale or were just sort of at the precipice of that, and had the potential to build this new evidence in parenting and violence prevention. We also looked at programs that focused on parental mental health, because those types of programs may also be attentive to IPV or intimate partner violence. So each parent partner organization involved in the mapping, we reached out to our networks to identify parenting programs. For example, PLH contacted their implementing partners and country managers. UNICEF connected with their country office staff, and Equimundo and we at the collaborative, we consulted our local partners and conducted a rapid review of the literature. And we collected lots of information about the program, the reach, the target groups, the main activities, the delivery model, the content, and any evidence that the program might have had related to their theory of change. And then we met monthly to discuss our findings. Next slide. So in total, we mapped about 69 parenting programs across 43 countries. The parenting programs we mapped are implemented by a wide variety of organizations and partnerships. Next slide. Most are either have been implemented by either local or international NGOs, around 38 of the programs that we mapped. Many others are delivered through partnerships between governments and NGOs, and that represents about 25 of the programs, or 36% of the programs that we mapped. And a smaller number of programs are implemented through collaborations between universities, research institutions, and NGOs. In terms of reach, a little more than half of the programs that we mapped documented that they reached more than 1,000 participants. And most of the programs that fell into this category represented partnerships between governments and NGOs. And about 19 of the programs that we mapped reached less than 1,000 people. And that's usually because those programs tended to have been implemented or been running for 3 years or less. Next slide. The mapping also wanted to capture the main goals and outcomes of the programs that work with caregivers. So we looked specifically at what was written on their website, the reports, the curricula, and any published studies. And unsurprisingly, the majority of the parenting programs mainly focused on improving the way that caregivers interact with and raise their children. For example, programs aimed to foster positive parenting practices. They encourage nurturing care and manage child behavior. In contrast, far fewer of the programs had explicit goals and outcomes on gender equality, men's engagement, IPV, and caregiver mental health and well-being. Again, mental health and well-being was an important thing we wanted to look at because it is an important risk factor for violence at home. So this, as you can see, presents a real opportunity for parenting programs to more intentionally address these issues in the future. Next slide. Among the 69 programs that we mapped, 67 sought to prevent or reduce violence against children. And of those, 33, or about half of the programs, sought to address both forms of violence, so both VAC and IPV, showing that though there are many programs that are already working at this intersection of both forms of violence, there's still lots of opportunity for more parenting programs to include a focus on violence against women in the home. And we interviewed practitioners from programs that were addressing VAC, but not VAL, to better understand why this wasn't being addressed. And they said that, they have concerns about overloading already very stacked program curricula because they were already addressing a lot of different topics. There were limitations in staff knowledge and capacity and concerns about how do you effectively engage fathers to talk about violence prevention. There were also concerns about how to adequately respond to or refer women who were experiencing violence to adequate services. All right, next slide. Let's talk about gender equity, shall we? The mapping aimed to assess to what extent programs were already addressing gender in the programmatic design, content, and delivery. So for example, how were the main activities designed to promote gender equality? What evidence was there that the program was able to shift restrictive, harmful gender norms? Next slide. Yeah, just more of the questions we wanted to answer as we were addressing this question around gender equity. And after reviewing the openly available published materials. So again, we looked at curricula, we looked at facilitator manuals, we looked at program briefs, evaluation reports, we consulted with key stakeholders. We ended up placing the parenting programs into specific categories because it wasn't a question of whether a program addressed gender or not, but how deeply was this integrated? Because many of the programs we mapped did address gender, but to varying degrees. So I'll go through briefly each of those categories, and as I do so, I'd love for you to sort of reflect and sit and think, where does my parenting program or service currently fit, and is there room to potentially strengthen? So some programs, like you see in the red, make little mention of gender or gender norms. These might be what you would call maybe gender blind programs. While those in the orange make sometimes superficial references to gender by mentioning fathers and mothers, but they might not talk about power dynamics or encourage the sharing of roles and responsibilities between caregivers in the home. While those that were in the green, that we categorize as some integration, do integrate some gender-related content, but it's often limited to sort of the gender sessions, which might constitute, one or two different modules. So they're kind of one-off and not necessarily connected to the broader goals of the program. While those in the purple that we categorized as gender transformative were consistently and intentionally addressing gender equality and power dynamics, not only within the content, but also as an integral part of who they engaged. It was included in the program objectives and in their measurement of expected programs, so of expected outcomes, rather. So it was really visible when you looked at a lot of the materials that were openly available. Next slide. So what did we find? Um, so these were the results. About 1/3 of the programs we mapped, we categorized as gender transformative, while 2/3 of the programs still have room to better integrate gender. And many of the practitioners that we spoke with on one-on-one interviews said that they were really eager to strengthen the gender transformative content of their programs and were taking active steps to do so. However, many others said that they struggled with where to begin. Where are the entry points where their program could be strengthened? How do they create content and do trainings that enable this really thoughtful, non-judgmental reflection on gender norms with parents, particularly in the face of rising backlash against gender equality? There were also challenges not only with how to shift or revise program content, but also rethinking how a program is implemented and how to maintain implementation quality in ways that encourage these more gender equitable norms. So those are some of the highlights from the findings. You can read so much more in the report, and I hope you do. And that's it from me. So with that, I'll hand it back to Maya. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jane, for this comprehensive work and for summarizing it for us in such a helpful way and providing us these insights. Thank you. Next, we will hear from Christine Kolb-Stewart, who will talk to us about the key messages and recommendations. Christine?
Thank you very much. And thank you to Jane for the overview of the main findings. So I'm just going to get straight into it. I was just going to spend a little bit of time today talking about the key messages and recommendations, which really resonate with UNICEF's strategic approach to the intersections of violence against children and violence against women, and why that's so important for our child protection priorities. So the first thing I wanted to focus on, and one of the things that I think is really most striking in terms of the findings from this mapping, is that parenting programs are doing far more than many of us traditionally associate with parenting support. Parenting programs are increasingly addressing child development, violence prevention, mental health, and gender equality at the same time. So these programs are not just teaching caregivers about child development, they're really increasingly being used to reduce violence, improve caregiver mental health, strengthen family relationships, and engage fathers. And that really makes parenting programs and universal parenting support one of the few interventions that can simultaneously deliver outcomes across child protection, across health, across gender equality, and early childhood development. And yeah, it's just a really, really fantastic and exciting platform for this set of initiatives. And the second message that comes out is that progress is real, but also incomplete. So many programs, as Jane walked us through, are beginning this journey, but there is significant room to deepen how these kinds of programs address power, norms, and violence in some cases. So only around 30% of the programs that were mapped were fully gender transformative, as Jane walked us through. And many others were beginning to engage fathers or mention gender, but they really weren't yet systematically addressing unequal power dynamics that drive violence. And this tells us that the opportunity is really about adaptation. It's not about starting from scratch, which I think is the good news. It's strengthening what already exists. And that's a really important consideration with respect to some of the tools that I'm going to briefly mention. The third message I wanted to draw out, and this I think is where the opportunity really lies, is that we need to move beyond small-scale pilots. Some of the most promising examples in the mapping are programs being integrated, national parenting strategies, and frontline service delivery platforms. And this is really about how we're going to move from reaching hundreds of families to reaching hundreds of thousands or millions, where the real opportunity exists. So I think we've moved on already to the recommendations, which I'm just going to talk you through here. So we've got 4 of these. So echoing the key findings, we need greater investment in scaling programs through national systems. That means embedding parenting support into health systems, child protection systems, education systems, and social protection systems, rather than funding isolated interventions that can sometimes struggle to sustain impact. The second is to strengthen existing programs to become more gender transformative rather than reinventing new ones. So many programs already have very strong delivery platforms. So we really believe that then the priority now should be helping them strengthen their content so that they can more intentionally address harmful gender norms, promote equitable caregiving, and prevent violence against both women and children. Third, we need to build stronger evidence on what works. So many programs are at the point of documenting outcomes, but we really still need better evidence on what works to prevent both forms of violence, to shift gender norms, and to sustain impact over time. And we also, as is so often the case, need more evidence in humanitarian settings and among underserved populations. And finally, we need to break down sector silos and think about building a family wellbeing agenda. So this report really makes clear that families experience these challenges together, but as we know, our systems often respond separately. And the reality is that violence, mental health challenges, child development risks, and gender inequality are interconnected, and our policy and programming responses really need to reflect that. And as I said, parenting offers a powerful platform to bring together sectors like child protection, GBV, health, early childhood development, and mental health together. And this is a great opportunity to seize that moment. Next slide, please. So I mentioned some of the key resources that this group, UNICEF Prevention Collaborative Equimundo, have developed to support implementers who are working to reduce violence against children and violence against women through parenting programs. So I'm just going to flag a couple of these different sets of resources. So the first is a set of 4 practical briefs. We will share either in the chat if it's working or afterwards links to the briefs. But these have been designed for practitioners who are already running parenting programs and are looking for concrete ways to strengthen them in the ways that we've described. So the starting point is really quite simple. In many contexts, parenting programs are already reaching families at scale. So the question is how to build on that platform to better address violence in the home and promote more equitable relationships. So the briefs were designed to bring together the evidence that violence against children and violence against women often co-occur, and that parenting programs can help address both, particularly if they're designed intentionally to do so. And the briefs then walk through the why, the what, the how, why this matters, what stronger programs look like in practice, and how to adapt existing models without overloading them. And then the final brief focuses on measurement, because, of course, if we want to scale these approaches, we need to be clearer about what success looks like and how we track it. And as I said, overall, the aim here is not to create new programs, but to strengthen and evolve what already exists. And that's really the kind of genesis of this set of briefs. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the final resource I wanted to highlight is a practical tool that came directly out of this mapping process. One of the most consistent questions we heard from partners when we were doing this work was, where do we start? How do we actually assess our own programs and identify what needs strengthening? And in response to that, the Parenting Affinity Group developed a simple, structured review tool. It's a spreadsheet that organizations can use to analyze their existing parenting programs, and it provides guiding questions to help teams to reflect on where and how they're already addressing gender dynamics, violence against children and violence against women, and where there might be opportunities to go further. And as I've said, I think we really want to emphasize this isn't about starting from scratch. It's about building on what exists and identifying those entry points for strengthening content or delivery or outcomes or partnerships. And the tool's designed, as with all of these resources, to be user-friendly, to be practical, to be flexible, so that teams can use it in different contexts where they might be at earlier stages, or maybe even already partway through an adaptation process. And ultimately, the aim of these resources is to support more systematic, evidence-informed programme improvement so that strengthening efforts are intentional rather than ad hoc. So if this or any of the resources I've mentioned are of interest, I'd really invite you to reach out to the group to express interest in joining our community of practice, which is a space where we connect and share and collectively try to build capacity for this work. So with that, I've been through some of the resources, and now I think we're going to take a moment to hear about the process of adaptation in practice, and to give us an insight into this. It's a great pleasure to hand over to Hartrain from RTCCD, who's going to give us an overview of the experience of the adaptation process in Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Yeah. Thank you, Lucia and Jen. We are looking forward to the new tools. And hi, college. It's my pleasure today to share with you the story of how the Early Journey of Life program in Vietnam integrated gender empowerment into the early childhood development. I think maybe the next slide. Okay, great. So Early Journey of Life is a collaborative initiative between RTCCD Vietnam and the Monash University in Australia, with a strong support from the Ministry of Health of Vietnam. Next slide, please. the EJO, so we call it for short. The EJO program tackles the first 2,000 days of a child's life, from pregnancies until the child reaches 5 years of age, which include 12 in-person practice sessions facilitated by the child health worker or frontline health collaborators. In addition, the program provides free and user-friendly e-learning courses, which featuring video, posters, short reading material. So in that 12 in-person practice session, they are integrated with the routine immunization activities. This means that when parents bring their children for vaccination, they stay additional 30 to 45 minutes to learn and practice parenting skills. So EJO is a structured and holistic program that covers a wide range of topics of interest to caregiver. You can see it on the right hand of this slide. So gender empowerment is embedded throughout the program, reflected in the key message, in the visual material, and in most of the in-person session. Next, please. So this slide illustrates how the parenting education session are integrated into the immunization activity. You know that in Vietnam, parents are requested by the government to stay for about 30 minutes after the vaccination to monitor any potential adverse reactions. So EJO just leverage this valuable opportunity to deliver parenting education during this waiting time. But some communes, they prefer to provide parenting education before the vaccination start. So we are open for them to select the optimal time that they prefer. Next slide, please. So these are some photos from the field. As you can see, men are actively engaged in the session, and especially when children under 24 months of age, they engage very much. They accompany their wife and their children to the vaccination. And next slide. So you might be wondering why early childhood of life integrates gender empowerment into the ECD. We intentionally choose moments when men come to the health-related activity naturally. That is vaccination visit. And also we see that integrating VAC and VOR into ECD, early childhood development, makes the topic more accessible and more acceptable to men. They come to these sessions to learn how to care for their pregnant wife and care for their children. So we see that if VAC and VOR is addressed as a standalone issue, men may feel that it does not apply to them. They may think that it is for someone else, not for them, because they do not see themselves as a potential perpetrators of violence. So that's why we selected the approach of integration. Next slide, please. So this slide and the next one present an example of the key VAC and VOR messages we use in our early childhood life program. We align these messages with the World Health Organization's recommendations and frame them in a positive and encouraging way. All the messages are designed to guide caregivers toward supporting the full development potentials of their children, something that will motivate further engagement. Next one, please. Yeah, next one. And the further, next one, this is the key message. So this is a step how we integrate this. You can read it from the list on the slide, but I would like to focus on the 3 key steps. The step 2, step 4, and step 5. For the step 2, embedding gender equality into the EJO objective, that gave us a clear direction of action, because without objective, we may get lost somewhere. And for the step 5, monitoring gender outcome, it is very critical. So Christine just introduced to us the 4 brief report from the consortium. I encourage you to read all of them, especially the double 4 brief. They provide very practical tools to measure men's engagement, attitude, knowledge, co-parenting behavior change in back and forth. I found them extremely useful. And for the step 4, encouraging men participation, it is very essential because even the best program, it might not work if men don't show up. So how do we do? We use simple incentives such as storybooks for couple who attended at least 6 sessions together. And we organize father and child interaction contest and ask family to send short video. And they got an awards. And also we have a recognition award for facilitator who encourage more men to their sessions. So all these approaches works very well. Next slide, please. So in summary, what do we learn from the gender transformative approach in ECD in Vietnam? I would like to emphasize on the key message should be positive message and action-oriented message that attract men's attention and call for action. And stay with practical and skill-based session at first to engage men before introducing more sensitive topics like back and forth. And make sure that all the messages are consistent across all our material. Next, please. So we have, next slide, please. So we have several publications on our work, including lesson learned, publication in the peer-reviewed journal for your reference. So if you would like to learn more about early journey of life or learn about how our integration, feel free to contact me or Professor Jane Fisher from the Monash at the emails provided. We would be delighted to share with you the idea and to explore further collaboration. So thank you for listening. And if you have any question, we would love to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Had. That was it's very helpful to have this so illustrated for us and for the good work that you've done. I'm going to hand this off to Jenny Doubt next. Jenny, you there?
Yes.
There you are.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I think we actually have a few minutes. If you have any questions for Ha or for Jane or for Christine, before I close us out, were there any questions? I can't see any in the chat, but please take a minute, grab this opportunity. Okay, we have one in the chat. Have you considered the cultural backgrounds and local contexts of the locations in which the programs were conducted? I think this is a question, Jane, maybe for you on the mapping. Were we right? Are you happy to take this? Great.
Yeah, in total, we were able to map 69 different programs from 43 countries, mostly focused on the global south. So we did really try to capture a wide diversity of parenting programs that in some cases they worked with families in conflict or fragile settings. In others, they were working in more rural contexts. In some cases, they were working with indigenous or in some cases marginalized populations. So we did try to capture a wide diversity of programs in terms of reach and scale.
Thanks very much, Jane. There's another question here. I wonder, Ha, if you would be able to answer this one just based on your experience with the early journey of life, about what the facilitators and barriers to implementing gender transformative parenting programs. Do you think you could take a minute to reflect what some of the facilitators and barriers were to actually engaging and implementing this program?
Thank you. So here, both me from RTCD Vietnam and Professor Jane Fisher from Monash University in Australia also attended our program, encourage the facilitator to mention and to show the key message on the visual material to caregiver, especially to both husband and wife, about the benefit of encouragement to the child development. The harmony of the family living will benefit for the child development and good for the well-being of the woman as well. And we give the facilitator the reading, the video clip, and the 3 days training so that they understand fully about ECD and how to engage the gender transformative approach into the key message. And we have very good supportive supervision to coach them in on action of how to deliver the Q&A to family and how to engage them into the practice. So if there's both husband and wife are engaged into the in-person session, we always ask facilitator to ask the man to interact with the child. We always ask the man to practice how to reply positive to their wife. So that is how we give the facilitator tools to overcome the challenge, because we know that VAC and VAW is the topic that not very easy to address, to raise by the frontline health worker. But with all the supported tools, they find it very clear, very easy to mention. So Jen, do you have any additional input? Yeah.
I think you asked us earlier on about process. And I have to say at the beginning, we thought we would just try and give messages that violence is harmful, stop using violence. And we did a lot of community consultation and HA's own insights that that was not the approach to take. And that if we had a session advertised as being about violence reduction, we were told really clearly no one that session. So I think this switched approach of actually trying to promote equity, the benefits of harmonious collaboration between especially the child's development in this context, which you can see people are living in some pretty difficult and impoverished circumstances. And I think that we also have measured outcomes that demonstrate that this approach was associated with better child cognitive development. We did a randomized controlled trial. And in feeding that back, I think that is very powerful for families to think, I can actually serve my child better by creating a household like this. So that to me would be the takeout. Try and promote the positive alternative rather than just focusing directly on the harms of aggression and violence. And what we also have done, which Ha has not had a chance to talk about, is really give them ways of caring for an older child using positive behaviour practices. So not using harsh punishment, other ways of dealing with difficult child behaviours. And we continue to extend this work because parents want more. They're telling us what we have here is great, but we want more. How do we manage this? How do we manage that? So I think those would be the main lessons that certainly I've learnt, that we've learnt together through this program.
Thank you so much. I wonder if maybe we can just take one more minute to answer. A few people have asked questions about collaborations beyond the health sector. I know that was certainly, I had a question about, as you continue to evolve, how are you thinking about integrating this approach more systematically as the program scales to the national system? So I wonder if maybe we can take a minute you can take a minute to answer that question. And then any additional questions that haven't been answered, I would ask our colleagues at ISSA maybe to collect the questions, and we'll certainly look at addressing them in the follow-up email, which we're planning to write. So if I can hand back to you just for a minute, and then I'll close this out.
Do you want to start and I can add on?
Yes, thank you, Jen. So in terms of the integration into the health system in Vietnam, at this moment, we are integrated into the existing national system already with the full support by Ministry of Health. Every document, curriculum must be approved by the government, Ministry of Health. And for the integration, we work closely with Department of Health for all the implementation. So now it is not our project. We approach to the government as it is the government project. So we are the technical backstopping behind at the backstage. So that will ensure the integration. And the next question I see about how to measure the impact of the program, the outcome of the program. We follow the brief number 4 that Christine mentioned. You will see there will be question about father engagement, about co-parenting behavior change. There will be question about the IPV, a relationship between husband and wife partner. And there will be about sexual, physical, and verbal violence to the wife during pregnancies and after the delivery and the child rearing. All the questionnaire are there. How to analyze that it is there, and it is up to each program to select a part of that tools or a full, depends on your emphasis to collect the information. It is very useful. Yeah, that is the instrument I recommend you to read it carefully. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ha.
Just to add one quick
Sorry,
thing.
go ahead. Yeah.
We in terms of cross-sectoral engagement, which you also thank you referred to, as the children get bigger, we're going to work with Ministry of Education, who have also shown interest in this, in particular in preparing children for the transition to kindergarten and to school. But the other very crucial organisation has been the Women's Union, which is a state-based women's organisation that reaches right to village level. And they have been incredibly supportive as co-facilitators, and this is integrated into their work as family supporters. So our program involves all those sectors.
Many thanks. Thanks to you all for so much rich engagement. So as we come to the close of today's launch, I just wanted to take a moment to really reflect on what this global mapping represents and what it calls us to do next. As Jane showed us, what we've seen today is both encouraging and instructive. We've seen across 69 programs in 43 countries, there is really clear commitment to strengthening parenting, supporting child well-being, reducing violence in families, and that parenting programs, as Christine said, are already delivering across multiple priorities, often in really complex and resource-constrained settings. But we also know the findings show us that most programs are not yet systematically addressing gender inequalities and power dynamics, which are the very drivers that underpin the intersections of violence against women and violence against children. And this is really maybe where the opportunity lies. We now have a stronger shared understanding that violence against women and violence against children are not separate issues. They're interconnected and they are shaped by common risk factors, including, as we know, harmful gender norms, unequal power relations, and stressors within families and communities. And addressing these intersections is not really an add-on, but really central to achieving lasting impact. At Parenting for Lifelong Health, where I work, we are really deeply committed to advancing gender transformative parenting approaches as a core strategy for preventing violence and promoting family well-being. This means working really intentionally with both women and men, mothers and fathers, to shift norms, redistribute care, and build relationships that are grounded in respect, in equity, and nonviolence, as is the case right now in the work we are doing in Mexico. As was also highlighted today, the path forward requires us to move beyond isolated program effects, right? This means strengthening existing programs so that gender equality and violence prevention are integrated systematically and not sort of partially or incidentally. Investing in scale through national systems, as we've just heard from our partners in Vietnam, so that parenting support becomes a sustainable, multi-sectoral, cross-sectoral embedded service. and building a stronger shared evidence base while creating spaces like this one where there's ongoing learning and exchange and collaboration. So the question is no longer whether parenting programs can address these issues. It is how quickly, how effectively, and at what scale we can support them to do so. We're really encouraged by the partnerships that made this work possible, from UNICEF, from the Prevention Collaborative, from Equimundo, by the collaboration today with the Oak Foundation, the International Step by Step Association and their learning platform, and the ECOS Institute, and of course, our colleagues from the Early Journey of Life and from around the world, and by the growing community of practice committed to this agenda, because this is collective work and it's going to require our collective action. So as we move forward, Parenting for Lifelong Health stands ready to continue working alongside all of you to adapt, test, and scale solutions that support families, that advance gender equality, and ultimately prevent violence in all its forms. So with that, I would like to thank you for your engagement today, for your partnership, and for your continued commitment to children, women, men, and families everywhere. Thanks so much, everyone.